Introduction to Human Resources Management, Chapter 8, Developing Employees for Future Success. I mentioned earlier that training and development are two distinct issues or processes, and that's why there are two different chapters on this. Training is to get employees more adept at the job that they currently have, while development is to enhance and enrich their background so that they can move into a job that they may be eligible for in the future. Employee development can include formal education, job experience, relationships, assessment of personality, and other functions to be able to make sure that people are ready for potentially promotions or taking over other jobs, either within the company preferably, if you're the employer, or potentially other companies if you're the employee. Changing business environments also include a lot of international expansion. Development can go in there because we've already talked about taking an assignment from another country could be a really good way to develop it. That would be a job experience helping you with your development. You can also learn a broad range of technical and interpersonal skills. You could use mentoring and coaching as well to try and help develop someone. This is all tied into the idea of succession planning. Not success, meaning to be successful, but succession, meaning to succeed someone, to follow someone. So if I do employee development, that's a good part of my succession planning, because if I have a manager and that manager decides that they want to resign and leave or retire and go do something else, if I have a plan to replace them because I've already identified lower level employees who show promise and I've taken the time to develop the skill sets that they would need so that they could step into a promotion, then it becomes a lot easier to backfill these types of jobs. This goes to the internal hiring processes that we talked about. It shows that you value your employees so that they would have a higher level of job satisfaction because they know that you're investing in them. And they know that there's also the opportunity to move up. When you hire these people and you promote them, that gives a message to employees that if you do good, diligent work and put in the effort, then you will get a reward as a result. Next slide is just a graphic showing the difference between training and development. The focus for training is on your current job. For development, it's the future job. The use of work experience in the current training, it's probably low, but in development, whether you're being assigned to a different area or job enlargement, et cetera, things like that, it would be high. The goal of training is the preparation for the current job. The goal of development is the preparation for changes or to take other jobs in the future. And the participation for training is typically required. We have a lot of optional training, but we also have mandatory training for people in certain jobs. Development is typically voluntary because if you're going to do a succession plan, I may think that you are the best person for a particular job and I want to give you some development courses and then try to get you promoted in the future, and you are maybe perfectly comfortable keeping the job that you have and you have no interest in moving up. Forcing somebody to do something that they don't want to do kind of defeats the purpose. So these are typically voluntary programs. Something to be aware of in careers, I mentioned this a little bit earlier about the protean career. Protean careers are careers that change frequently because you change interests or your skills change because there's so much technological advancement in the industries. You have a lot of different jobs that are differing and changing over time. You may decide that you picked one career path and you don't like it because things have changed. You want to go into another career path. So you could take a variety of different jobs. You could take a variety of different careers. I have an MBA and I have a JD. I've worked as a business manager. I've worked as a training instructor. I've worked as the training director, but I'm also an attorney. I was also general counsel for a government organization. So I've had in my career two different career paths, and I've kind of combined a lot of the elements of both. You may also take a lot of jobs from different companies because they don't have an adequate career path. The age of working at one job for 30, 40 years is pretty much behind us. Most people go through at least a half a dozen jobs and maybe even a couple of different careers, meaning that they've changed from one segment of the economy to another, law versus business versus medicine. Because of this reality, employees' interests and skills and weaknesses have to be matched up with the employer that they're looking for. What you're good at maybe matches up very well with the job that we have available for you. If it's not, then maybe it's the wrong career path for you to go through. We could also incorporate development to get you the relationships and the formal courses and the information and the experience that you need to be able to step up to jobs within our current job. So you could be doing a protean career without leaving our job. This could be part of our development program and our succession planning so that you could move into either a promotion, or maybe I could put you into an even different department within the organization if you're qualified for it. The next chart just shows the differences between, or the relationships between interpersonal relationships, formal education, job experiences, and assessment in terms of employee development. For formal education, this could be workshops, short courses, lectures, simulations, business games, experiential programs. It could also be formal courses at colleges. Some courses are provided through the company. They pay for the tuition reimbursement or readmission. Some companies, mostly these larger companies, they may have their own training and development centers. That's what I've done in the past. Assessment is getting feedback from employees about the types of things that they do. Any training that you're doing, we talked about doing a needs assessment. Same should hold true for the development. If people are interested in moving into another career, they can identify the things that they know and the things that they don't, and that can help you figure out the best development program for them. The ways to do assessments, you can give them a psychological profile. One type that people typically use is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or the MBTI. This is something that you have to pay about $60 or $70, and you take it and you answer a whole bunch of questions. And it's based on the idea that people have different preferences. You're either a thinker or a judger, you're an introvert or extrovert, and they come up with your scores. They come up with basically 16 different personality types. I am not a fan of the MBTI. There are a lot of people who are critical of it. I'm only critical of it to the extent that people would use it to make job hiring decisions. I think it's a useful tool for self-reflection. I don't think it's particularly good at determining whether or not someone is right for a particular job. The reason is the questions sometimes result in personality types that are not consistent. If you take the test one day, you may get a different personality type the other day. The whole idea is that it's premised on, am I an introvert or am I an extrovert? Very rarely will you find anybody that's completely introverted or completely extroverted. But when you take the test, even if you are 51% extroverted, they're going to say that you're an extrovert, even if you have a lot of introversion as part of your personality. So it's not 100% accurate, and therefore some people have criticized it and said it's no more accurate than horoscopes from astrology. So it does have a role. It can help people assess what they think about themselves, and in that regard, I think it's useful. But I would never use it as a way to discriminate which people should get a particular job based on a personality type from the MBTI. The DISC is another type of personality test that you can take. It stands for Dominance, Influence, Steadiness, and Conscientiousness, and it was developed by a psychologist. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator was created by two women who were inspired by Carl Jung, another psychologist. The DISC has a better reputation, but again, any of these that you're taking, I would take with a grain of salt. They have a purpose and they have benefits, but I would not use them as a definitive way to decide whether someone should get a job or not. Performance appraisals is determining whether somebody is doing the job appropriately and performing at a high enough level to satisfy their task requirements. And the other thing that you can do is a 360 feedback approach. The next slide goes into a little bit more detail about that. It's called 360 because there are 360 degrees in a circle. Typically, when people do performance evaluation, it is a manager evaluating the performance of his subordinate. It's one way, top down. However, the 360 appraisal includes that, but it's also the employee would hear from its peers. So you could talk to people doing similar jobs, either in the same department or in other departments, any subordinates that might report to that employer. The manager that is doing the performance evaluation for this particular employee would have the same thing. Their manager would be doing a performance evaluation, but their employee can also evaluate the manager. That is something that a lot of managers are not used to, so it can create some conflict and controversy. You have to be careful about how it's put into play. Sometimes companies say they will guarantee anonymity. Anonymity is important because if you're evaluating your boss, you don't necessarily want your boss to know exactly what you said about the boss. At the same time, there's a downside to that because if you have anonymous people making comments about someone, if you've ever been on an internet message board, you see that people have no filter on that and they can be really over the top, which is also not particularly beneficial. So the 360 feedback is something that is useful. In theory, it's a great idea. In practice, it takes a little bit of work to do, especially for places that have never done it before, because if you're not used to that type of feedback chain, it can create some issues, particularly among managers who are not used to being evaluated by the people who work for them. The 360 appraisal can also be very complicated. It usually requires someone to handle it and be assigned to it to manage all of the results and facilitate all of the feedback. Another key part of employee development are job experiences. So you can assign people to different jobs. You can send them to different locations. They can develop interpersonal relationships. You can have coaches and mentors. A coach is someone who helps you figure out how to do the job that you're on now. A mentor is someone with a lot of senior experience who can give you some ideas about career management and career planning. By using these types of experiences, you can take them on and put them in your manager toolbox, your employee toolbox, and figure out the best course of action going forward. Job assignment includes job enlargement when you get a few different things that are assigned to you to see how well you're able to perform them. Job rotation we talked about a little bit earlier, taking somebody from one job and putting them into another similar job. If you are the manager or you want to be the manager of a particular area, you could have one department that you were pretty adept at. You could get assigned to another and do a job rotation and work in a different department so that you could one day become the manager of both departments. Promotions are an obvious way to help employee development. Usually, though, that would be part of the development has already taken place, and this is part of the succession plan. You may have some downward moves, and this is potentially controversial, but In my experience, a lot of managers don't really know how their employees do the work that they do. They know what they do, but they don't know how they do it. If I'm going to get promoted to be a manager someplace else and it's in an area where I may not know exactly what it is because I hadn't done that work before, I may get a lateral transfer or I may even get demoted so I can work with the people who are actually doing the job so that I can better understand what it takes to be successful at that job. Eventually, when I get promoted, I've had that experience, so when I'm managing those people, I'll know what it's like to be in their shoes and I can give them the proper resources to be successful. I can also get temporary assignments with other organizations. Maybe I go from one department to another department or a different location as well. Some places do offer sabbaticals. I've really not heard of a sabbatical unless you're a college professor. You take some time off, you take a break, you do some research, you figure things out. Maybe higher end companies with higher level professionals, they will give you some sabbatical time, but it does not happen very frequently. But you should be aware that they do exist. The next chart is just an example of how these different experiences can be used for employee development. Again, promotion, transfer, downward move, etc. It's just how they're all interconnected. We will talk about this again in Chapter 16, but moving to another country can be a great job experience. Even though it's the same company, they are in a different culture. They may have different ways of doing things. They may be better. They may be worse than what you're used to. When you leave that assignment, you now have a different perspective on how things can be done. And because you have that perspective, you may be able to come up with new ideas about how to improve things. We talked about mentoring or coaching slightly beforehand. So again, these interpersonal relationships can help with career development. A coach is going to walk you through the types of work that you're doing. A mentor can give you more bigger picture things. These are usually assignments. You go have lunch with somebody once a month. The best way to do it is to have a formal process. You're assigned a coach and you're assigned a mentor. And there is a list and it's facilitated and managed by somebody else in training. Because development is so closely related to career advancement, there should be some management of careers in there. Employees should be looking at their career and where they want to be in a year to 2 years to 5 years. The best way to do it is collect as much information as you can, get feedback from your current boss, get feedback from HR, just set some goals, figure out what you need to do to be able to achieve those goals, what kind of training and development is necessary. Do some action planning and then follow through on it. If you have a company with a career path, this should be built right into it. The next chart here just kind of goes over what we were mentioning. Data gathering, you want to look at the competencies you need for particular jobs that you would be getting in the future. You want to have confidentiality with the feedback, particularly if it's a sensitive issue that you're discussing with the mentor. That doesn't necessarily need to be documented and kept in a file somewhere. But you do want to look at specific factors related to strengths and improvement areas so you can get that feedback from your coach or your mentor. Goal setting is, what do you want to do? What kind of job do you want to get? What do I need to be able to get that job? And then the action planning and following through is getting those goals met so that I can get the job going forward. The thing about the goal setting and the action planning, you have to make sure that it's realistic. If I want to be the CEO of a company, I'm not going to do that in 2 months. Okay, it may take several years and you have to take baby steps in order to get there. Some of the things you could do for data gathering, it's usually self-assessment. So again, I said that the MBTI is good for that. You can use the Strong Campbell inventory. It's another product that is out there that's available. They can also do self-directed searching to get some information about where they think they need to be, what type of jobs are they interested in. The next slide just shows an example of a self-assessment exercise. I would read through that in your PowerPoint, and maybe it'll give you some ideas about your own job search. The goal setting should be to identify the jobs that you've identified through the CERT, figure out what types of positions there are, what levels of skill are necessary, what type of work setting they have, what kind of skills you need to acquire to be able to be qualified to get those jobs. And then making sure you have an action plan, spell it out. If you go into school and you're a major in a particular school in the university, they're going to have all of the required courses and the elective courses. If I want to get an MBA, what do I need to get there? If I want to get a law degree, what do I need to get there? If I get a law degree, what kind of job do I want to get in the future? Having all of that spelled out and having a systematic approach to be able to checking off all of those boxes along the way is really key. The next slide just shows a demonstration of what a career development plan could look like. You put the employee name on there, their title, their immediate manager, what competencies they have, what strengths they have, what areas of improvement, otherwise known as weaknesses, career goals, long-term and short-term, the next assignments that they could be looking at, the type of training and development that has been identified that they should be taking. And then you just check in with this over time to make sure that it's moving along. One thing related to development is something known as the glass ceiling. In business, when you get promoted, typically if you're in a high-rise building, you get promoted, you go upstairs with the other senior managers. They call it a glass ceiling because imagine if the floor was made of glass, you could see where you wanted to get, but you can't get there because there's some type of barrier to your advancement. This is typically applicable to underrepresented groups, including women, from attaining top jobs, and it can be caused by a lack of access to training education, development job experiences, and other developmental relationships. So if you have a good, well-designed development program, you can help alleviate some of the problems that lead to the glass ceiling and allow people who are from these underrepresented groups to have the opportunity to move up. We've already mentioned succession planning, so I'm not going to go over that too much here, but please read through it in the book and through this slide. The next slide shows the development process for a succession plan as a graphic, so you have to figure out what positions are most likely to be at risk of having vacancies, identify the employees both holding the current job that needs to be replaced and those who could potentially replace it, ID the job requirements, measure the employee potential, figure out the plan of the development needs, what do they need to be able to pick up to get there, link the succession planning and other HR systems. So if you have a network, if you have that learning management system and a high-performance system, hopefully they have a dashboard in there that can be utilized for this purpose. Provide the feedback to employees and then measure the plan's effectiveness. Over time, 3-5 years down the road, you've had this employment succession plan in place. Is it working? Are we able to find people that are performing at a high level? If not, we need to go back and fix it. If it works, we need to find out if they could be improved in any way. One of the things about development is that we're hoping to get good managers out of it. Some managers tend to be rather dysfunctional, and the old saying is that you come for the job, you hire for the corporation, you want to go work for a particular company, and you quit your job or you leave the company because of your manager. A lot of managers may have some issues, things that you would want to look at. These toxic managers, they're insensitive to others, their inability to be a team player, they may be arrogant, poor conflict management skills, they either avoid it or they create it, the inability to meet business objectives because they don't have the skill set necessary or the technical capability, and the inability to adapt to change. The first few here, insensitivity to others, inability to be a team player, and arrogance, that tends to be part of a narcissistic personality type. That's usually not a good idea to work for somebody who's like that because they'll take credit for all of the ideas that you came up with. They won't give you any credit, but they'll criticize you when things go wrong. So that can wear out people very quickly and tend to lead to job dissatisfaction and people leaving the job. When you have your development program, you want to make sure that these are identified things that you're trying to avoid. Try and be able to get skill sets in here that people can recognize if these are parts of the problems that they're facing from feedback and come up with solutions so that they can correct it. One of the problems with managers is typically they hire people who are good at the job to be the manager of that department. And that leads to what's known as micromanaging. If you've ever worked for a micromanager, you know that it's somebody who's basically looking over your shoulder and telling you how to do every aspect of your job all the time. That is not a fun job to be in when you have a micromanager. And the reason that people tend to be micromanagers is because if they were a star at the job and now they're managing other people, they want other people to do the job exactly the same way that they did it, and they hadn't been trained on management techniques. They probably don't have education in it. They hadn't gone through a developmental program. They just picked a regular employee and said, now you're in charge. That leads to micromanagement. It can also lead to some of this dysfunctional behavior that we talked about. Understanding the way people work, especially if you give them these experiences by either transferring from lateral jobs or demoting, like I mentioned before, when you understand what people do, you also understand that there's a lot of different ways to get the job done. As long as it's legal, I don't particularly care how people go about doing the work. If it gets done on time and quickly, I'm happy. It doesn't have to be exactly the way that I thought about it because, frankly, somebody could come up with a better way of doing it than me. So if you're one of those micromanagers because you didn't get the training, that's one thing to be aware of. Interestingly, I'm going to use sports as an example. The Red Sox hadn't won the World Series for something like 86 years, and the manager that they had in the early 2000s was named Terry Francona. He was a baseball player, but he was not a very good baseball player. In fact, he was a fairly terrible baseball player, but he was a great manager. He could take all of these star players, figured out how to manage them correctly, and they ended up winning at least a couple of World Series with him for the first time in almost a century. It's interesting to point out that when you're not that great at playing baseball, you spend a lot of time on the bench rather than actually playing. You spend a lot of time talking to other players. You see how they interact with each other. You see what motivates them. So when he became a manager, he was able to rely on some of the skills that he learned, these interpersonal skills, and the more bigger picture things. If he had been a superstar like Michael Jordan owned a basketball team and they didn't do particularly well because he wanted everybody to play like Michael Jordan, which is not going to happen. So that's just an example of how sometimes you can get these micromanagers and these other dysfunctional features of managers. And if you do development and training correctly, you can help avoid some of that going forward. And that takes it for Chapter 8. There's a few summary slides here. Please take a look.